exports. And given the United States' long-standing embargo with Cuba, which has lasted for about 60 years now, these obviously are 4 items that we do not trade with Cuba. President Eisenhower imposed an embargo on Cuba on October 19, 1960, which also happens to be my birthday. And following the embargo were various tense international historic events that I'm sure you've read about in your middle school textbooks, like the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, Cuban Missile Crisis, etc. And following these kind of led to a very tense relationship between the United States and Cuba in the latter half of the 20th century. But recently, in December 2014, which I'm sure you saw in the news, Obama started the process of normalizing relations with Cuba. And therefore, trade in 1960 looked a little bit different than what trade looks like now. So I'm going to touch on kind of what's changed and what's remained the same between trade in 1960 with Cuba and trade now in 2016. So what did the embargo look like in 1960? According to a Time magazine article on October 31st, 1960, quote, the United States borrowed from Cuba 2/3 of all American imports, end quote. This would most importantly include automobiles, trucks, industrial, electrical machinery. So that's why in a lot of photos you'll see cars that look like they're from the 1950s in Cuba's capital, Havana, because they are in fact from the 1950s. The embargo ultimately served as a symbolic stance against Fidel Castro and his communist regime. So now, 56 years later, what does the embargo look like now, given the most recent diplomatic conversations that Obama's had with Cuba? According to a Washington Post article on January 15, 2015, by Karen DeYoung, we, quote, increased export of building materials and U.S. telecommunications and other technological goods to Cuba, end quote. So, as you can see, this would obviously help create greater accessibility to the internet, and Cuba's created a lot of Wi-Fi hotspots because of this. But overall, as you have heard, the embargo is really not that much different than what it looked like in 1960, aside from a few additional items that we can now trade with Cuba, most importantly, like I mentioned, the telecommunications and technological goods. Given the fact that it's not very different, it's not drastically, nothing's really changed between 1960 and 2016, which is shocking because it's a 56-year time period. There's a lot of discussion among policymakers and politicians about what the future looks like with Cuba and what our relationship looks like, more importantly, our economic relationship. Will we open up more embassies? Will we lift travel restrictions, etc.? So that's something we're just going to have to wait and see what the future holds. Thanks.
Thank you.